Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhi Khwaja with American Muslim Community Foundation, and today on the Muslim Philanthropy podcast, I have the pleasure of having Shireen Zaman, who is the director of the Rise Together Fund, a project of the Proteus Fund, and they have been nominated as the Outstanding Foundation or Grantmaker for the Muslim Philanthropy Awards. Shireen, welcome to the show, and congratulations.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, Muhi.
Likewise, for those of you that are listening or watching, Shireen and I used to work together at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding many years ago, and we've kind of went off doing our own stuff. So it's great to have an opportunity to catch up with you and see all the great work you're doing at Proteus.
Thanks. No, it's great to be reconnected and to see all of the great work that you're doing there with the foundation. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Likewise. So why don't you share a little bit more about, when you got to Proteus, how things were, and kind of under your leadership as the director of the Rise Together Fund, how you've been able to help grow more partnerships and community relations with the Muslim community.
Sure. Well, I'll start with how I first learned about Proteus Fund, because you'll appreciate this, having done fundraising at ISPU. When I joined the organization, the very first foundation grant I got was from Proteus Fund and the program that I now direct. So
Awesome.
For a new executive director, that's like golden, right? That you brought in a grant and from a national foundation. But what I always appreciated about the work at Proteus was that it was more than just grant making, right? It really is about supporting the organization as a whole and connecting the organization to other like-minded groups. So thankfully, we were a grantee at ISPU, and then as I got to know more about the work, I came on to the organization as the director of what's now called the Rise Together Fund. So I would say, it's been a really interesting ride. It's been 7 years. Just this past fall was my 7-year anniversary. And over the last few years, we've done a couple of really important things. So first is that we started to make a really intentional shift from thinking about the work to support Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities in the US as one in response to 9/11 and through a securitized lens. So that's sort of the framework that I came into. Mm-hmm. And over the last several years, we've really been deliberate about thinking about our work as part of a larger ecosystem of organizations and communities that are seeking justice in the US and have faced oppression over many, many years. So we started to look at a racial justice analysis. We started to look at our connection to the broader immigrant rights movement and be really intentional about positioning the work of Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities who, yes, have been disproportionately impacted by post 9/11 backlash, but have also been impacted in many other ways and in many other circumstances. So a couple of ways that I think that changed our work. I mean, one is that we now fund mostly local and regional organizing groups. We now fund, and I think we have connections with organizations in over 26 states. And this year, we'll end the year having had now 30 core grantees, probably about the same number rapid response or opportunity grantees, which are our smaller grants. We also do C4 legislative advocacy funding. So we've really built an interesting model that can support organizations in a number of different ways.
And if you don't mind sharing, Proteus Fund overall, what was it about the Masa community or immigrant community that led them to say, this is something that we want to be a focus area?
That's actually a great question and a really important story to tell in philanthropy. So Proteus Fund is a broad-based social justice funder. Part of our business is hosting donor collaboratives like Rise Together Fund, but we also host donor advice funds. We have a fiscally sponsored project program. And so when the idea around creating this pooled fund to support Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities came about, it was really sort of the vision of our executive director at the time, a woman named Meg Gage. And two key anchor funders, Open Society Foundation and Atlantic Philanthropies. And they had this somewhat, radical idea at the time, which was that we should actually be funding the voices of directly impacted people to have a say in the policies that impact them. So we've been around now for 11 years, but prior to that, the groups that were being funded to advocate on things like the Patriot Act or surveillance or profiling were largely, national civil rights organizations based in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And yes, some of them had partnerships with folks in our community, but many were sort of advocating and righteously so, but still didn't include the voices of our community. So it was really pretty revolutionary at the time to fund our communities and to do this kind of work. And I think what we've seen over the last 11 years is not only have we grown a set of organizations that represent our communities at the national level, but we're now seeing this amazing flourishing of organizations at the local and regional level that our communities are not only leading, but are really also thinking about the integration and partnership with other communities of color.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point, and I'm glad that you shared kind of the vision from the senior leadership of the organization and really then creating a grassroots effort. And I love the fact that you guys are focusing on local and regional, because a lot of the times it's exactly that. The national organizations have more of a public spotlight and maybe more access to funding. But now that you're kind of finding those smaller local regional organizations, you're providing them more opportunity and access to philanthropy and mainstream philanthropy. So you're in 26 states, funded in 26 states, and millions of dollars spent granting out to the community. Do you mind highlighting just a few of those projects and kind of, why Rise Together Fund selected those projects in particular?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I guess a couple of things that I would say is that in addition to the grants that we make, we also fund a lot of sort of support and kind of technical assistance for the field. So one, important example that's really relevant to the moment that we're in this week is that last year we engaged two researchers who knew about civic engagement work in the Muslim, Arab, and South Asian community and said, we want to understand the landscape. What do organizations need? Who's working on civic engagement? And what do we need to do to fund the community to sort of perform at its highest level for the 2020 elections? So those two researchers came back to us with a set of recommendations. And the key recommendation around in their work was that organizations in our community had trouble getting access to voter data, had trouble sort of analyzing or identifying voter data to target their communities, and then needed more capacity to do outreach. So we engaged a researcher named Tom Wong, who's very well known in sort of the immigrant rights space in terms of doing demographic work and voter engagement work. And he actually developed an algorithm to help identify Muslim, Arab, and South Asian names in the voter
Interesting.
file.
Yeah.
We had a whole amazing training planned with him in April of this year, which we, of course, then moved virtually. And he trained over 20 of our grantees in how to use their data and understand these files that he could create for them. And then he and his team of research assistants actually worked one-on-one with over a dozen organizations in our field to be able to create voter lists for them, help them target, and then create sort of phone banking strategies and outreach strategies with them. So all of those organizations were grantees of ours who got, grants maybe in the range of $10,000 to $50,000. But then on top of that, they had this extra layer of support that we think really helped boost turnout and outreach in our communities. Of course, all the data will come out over the next several months about what turnout actually looked like. But just anecdotally, we saw our communities coming out in really large numbers in places like Georgia and North Carolina and other places that we were able to make these investments. So that's just one project that I would highlight that we're really excited about.
Yeah, and how fascinating and profound that, A, you're giving financial support, but then on top of that, you're you're convening all of your funders together and giving them an opportunity to A, collaborate, and B,
Yeah.
learn. So I think it's really fascinating how you are engaging these organizations that you're supporting as well.
And I guess the other thing that I would actually just mention about that research is we commissioned that research and obviously looked at it and took action based on the recommendations, but we actually also shared that research with other funders in our space to say, here are the priorities and here's what we're doing. And like, we hope you all look at these recommendations too and take them on. So it's also about, and I think a big part of our work over the last, 10 plus years has been about educating other donors and moving them along in terms of supporting our communities. So, I mean, you and I both know in our days raising money that our communities are often overlooked as either being too small
Right.
or, only located in certain places, or maybe even like we're not sure who those people are, right? There's a lack of familiarity, I think, in institutional philanthropy about who our communities are and what we need. And so a big part of the role that Rise Together Fund plays is convening donors. We are a collaborative fund, so we actually rely on contributions from other donors. And we now have over 30 donors that contribute to our fund. But even beyond those 30 donors, we do funder briefings and we present research, like what I mentioned, because our goal is that more resources come to our community. If they come through us, like that's great, but ideally we want to just see more resources coming through our
Yeah, and I think that's a great point and something that I want to ask you about as well is like, you're focused on providing access and hopefully more equity of mainstream philanthropy to the Masa community. What are things that you hope other mainstream philanthropic grant making institutions will do to kind of make sure that as Muslims are, they say 1% of the population, can 1% of philanthropic dollars from foundations or even individuals get to Muslim led charities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And it is, there has been a huge focus on equity and how do we address sort of inequities within all of our systems. And the philanthropic system is certainly one that has been perpetuated inequality. So I guess there's a couple of things. I mean, one is, as we know, right, having worked at a think tank, data on our communities is hard to come by. And so I think ISPU and others who are doing research on the community do everyone a great service in terms of advocates being able to have data, but also those of us who are trying to sort of document, like, here's who Muslim communities or Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities are. Um, I remember talking through some of the data on poverty within the Muslim community, and maybe there is this perception, right, that the Muslim community is like achieving at this high income level, but the reality is actually quite different, and there's actually quite a bit of poverty within our communities. And so, for program officers at foundations, if you're looking at economic inequity, are Muslims part of your portfolio, or are organizations that are at least connected to Muslim communities locally
Mm-hmm.
part of your portfolio? So I think those are some of the questions that we've been raising, and I think data actually is a huge opportunity to present that really clearly. We 2 years ago actually commissioned a set of research to look at where Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities were growing most quickly around the country. So, working actually again with Tom Wong, he was able to look at census data and understand sort of the backgrounds of folks
Nice.
in different states. And so then we use that data to actually then go to local foundations and say, here are communities who are growing by 200% actually. And if you're not already funding them, you definitely should be. And so it was really interesting. And we found, I mean, in places that you would assume where the Masa community is growing quickly, like Minneapolis, but also other places that we actually were even surprised by: North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, Indianapolis, Seattle, Washington are sort of at the top of that list. So it was a really good opportunity, again, to use data and say, if you want to be reflective of the communities that you support, here are communities that are growing and you need to think about how you engage them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how our past at ISPU is playing a pivotal role in helping us give funding back out to the community as well. So it's like it almost comes full circle. Um, so I want to again take this opportunity to just really say thank you for all of your leadership at Proteus Fund and the Rise Together Fund. And I'm really happy to see that the community nominated you as well. So we're looking forward to hosting you at the annual symposium on Saturday, November 14th. Our special guest speaker, Hassan Minaj, will be there. We'll have two great panels on nonprofits creating a better tomorrow, where we'll talk about challenges for institutions, and we'll look at the role of zakat and sadaqah in social justice, how people can use their collective power to help different causes. So looking forward to hosting you at the event. And again, congratulations on the nomination.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to Saturday.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we'll see you there. Take care.